We should be going live, assuming all is well. And as soon as we see the live, we are live. It worked. Okay, it's like a small miracle when the technology works for me. I am so happy to introduce Leora Tanenbaum. Leora is so cool. She moved into my neighborhood a couple of years ago until we became friends, and then I found out she's written 5 books. And Leora, like, I have to tell you, as somebody who's finishing one, like the idea of writing 5 is just freaking mind-boggling. Congratulations.
Thank you. But isn't it fun to write a book?
You know what? Ask me about that in a few weeks. Ask me out. And also, how many years out are you from your last book?
Over 5 years. My last one was 2015.
So I feel like it's like childbirth, you know, like you forget how terrible it is while you're going through it. That's my sense.
Not terrible, but Sheva, come on, you're loving it and you know it.
I'm not sure, Leora. But anyway, Leora's book was called Slut, and that came out in what year? I have it to 2000, right? So like
1999.
20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. And then since then, well, why don't you tell everybody about all your books, and then we can sort of jump into some questions about them.
Sure. So I've written 2 books about slut shaming. The first one came out in 1999, as Sheva said. And what's interesting about that is nobody was writing about it. And in fact, the term slut shaming did not exist. I had to create a term to describe the phenomenon that I was researching and writing about. The term I created was actually slut bashing, which then quickly morphed into slut shaming.
Do you have any idea why? Do you have any idea why slut bashing became slut shaming? Do you have any thoughts on
that? Nobody's ever asked me that, and I haven't thought about it. But I will think right now, really fast, and I will say,
we could write a book about it.
Well, what I wrote about in 1999 was about a very specific phenomenon involving primarily teenage girls in junior high and high school who were labeled sluts by their peers and who were ostracized, harassed, assaulted, bullied because they, had been so labeled. And the type of activity that I was describing was quite violent in many ways. Even if it was just verbal, there was
emotionally violent.
Whereas slut shaming is a really good functional term in that it describes something wider than that. It describes a phenomenon that could just be sort of a one-off. You just call somebody a slut once, and then that person might not be called a slut again for a while, or maybe never if they're really lucky. So it's just a wider, more diffuse phenomenon. So I think the word slut shaming is actually extremely useful, and I'm glad that it was coined.
Well, considering you hadn't thought of it until just this moment, that was a pretty fantastic answer. Thank you.
And I wrote another book, the one Sheva was just referencing, that came out in 2015, which was an update on slut shaming. That one is called I'm Not a Slut. And the reason I wrote that is when I did my first round of research in the 90s, of course, there was no social media. There was a World Wide Web, but, most regular people did not have access to it, or email even. It was pretty young at that point. It was just a totally, totally different world. So I went back.
It's really hard to believe that, right? When you think about it now, Leora, like, it's mind-boggling.
In many ways, it was better.
That might be, but it was like, I almost, and as somebody who lived most of my life without the internet, I can't even, it just feels like another world. It's like automobiles or something. Anyway, go on, sorry.
Yeah, no. And actually your point is excellent, because the reason I went back, 17, 18 years later and did another round of research was I wanted to see in this new world, how has slut shaming and slut bashing, how have they changed? And the short answer, which, I'm happy to elaborate, but the short answer is it's so much worse now. So much worse now. Just because, we're all, and this is regardless of gender, every human being is under surveillance all the time. Even when we think we're not under surveillance, we are. And for women in particular, our bodies are constantly monitored and tracked and judged. It's ceaseless. And that plays a big role in slut shaming. Slut shaming is, well, I can't even define the term because the word slut really has no definition per se. It's such a slippery, fluid term. People are always asking me, well, what is a slut? What is slut shaming? Slut shaming is the phenomenon of being labeled a slut, okay? But then what's a slut? Somebody who is perceived to be too sexually active or to have too many sexual partners, to be too sexual.
Sexual. I think too sexual.
Sexual. But the thing is you don't have to be sexual to be a slut. It's
no, they're perceived
so crazy.
Right? But they're perceived as being too sexual, no?
You're perceived to be too sexual, or you are given this label for non-sexual reasons with the objective of diminishing you through your sexuality. So when people call Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris, I know, by the way, before we went live, Sheva asked me to not bring politics into it, so I apologize. But, you know, when people call them sluts and whores, they're not saying that because they think Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton are having too much sex or having sex with partner, you know, that's
right.
not what's going on. They're using this sexually charged term because that's the worst insult you can call a woman.
Right.
So the term slut,
it means somebody I don't like, right? Like, I mean, how is it different? I want to use a 4-letter word here that's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. So I'm just going to, how's it different than calling somebody a cunt?
So slut is all about agency. You are a slut because you have purportedly done something. You have exercised agency that you should not have exercised.
But do you think the people who use that term for, like, used a couple, you know, political characters, they would use those, you don't, when they say these women are sluts, right? And because they want to just insult them, wouldn't they use, and I didn't really want to go down this hole, but wouldn't they use this other expression just as well? Like, at that point, slut has become just this meaningless, nasty, horrible phrase. It doesn't actually have any meaning to it.
So what you're getting at is it seems random, right? I mean, I think that's what you're kind of getting.
Or just bad.
It could be any insult, and that's the one that
like bitch, like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
So there is some merit. I hear where you're going with that. To me, the difference with slut is because it is about agency, it ends up being a term to define a person's character. And it defines your character in a way that you cannot shake off. Once a slut, always a slut. You know, when Bill Clinton, again, I'm sorry, I'm getting into politics again. These are the examples that are popping into my head. But when Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky had their affair, which, you know, you can call it consensual, or you could say because of the power dynamic, it wasn't truly consensual. But nobody is saying that he assaulted her. She has not said so. So when they had their affair, and then it came to light, the language about Lewinsky versus Clinton was so strikingly different. So with Lewinsky, people called her the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal called her a little tart. That is a direct quote. Okay, so she was called a slut, a whore, a tart. You know, all those synonyms. Nobody used language like that to talk about the president. They said he has a problem. He can't keep it in his pants. That's not about his character. That's about something he can overcome. You know, he goes to therapy, you know, or he could just stop, right? But if you're a tart or a whore or a slut, that defines everything about you. That is who you are. That is your identity.
So can I pivot us a little bit and talk about, because I know you started with these books about girls in junior high school, right? In high school, right? And I'm really, really fascinated. Like, I think that sometimes this identity issue starts in schools. I mean, I think that's really sort of interesting because it starts there, and how it morphs into older women, as we're talking about, is super complicated. But have you found over the years that has changed at all? Because you did your first book in 2000, the second book 2015, and still focusing on teenagers and young women, correct?
Well, I have broadened it, but what's interesting about schools, there's so much surveillance in schools, right? And in some ways, school is in some ways like a prison, right? I mean, You
Oh
don't
my God, I'm sure there's a lot of kids out there who would agree with you.
you don't have your full liberties, and you cannot, behave exactly the way you want. You cannot bring into the building what you may want, and you cannot dress the way you want in many, many schools. Many schools have a codified dress code. Even if it's not codified, there's an unspoken dress code. So there is a lot of attention on the body of the student. So you're right to point to schools as a place where this really, breeds. On the other hand,
it's not for boys.
For girls, that is correct, because it's girls and women's bodies. It's our bodies that are the ones that get monitored and tracked, by and large. I do want to say that this phenomenon is significantly worse for people of color, for girls, and then for boys also, just as a sidebar, not necessarily from a sexualization point of view, but from a racialization point of view. Boys' bodies are also under surveillance in terms of whether or not they are conforming to racial stereotypes. So that is, that is a separate issue, but I think it is all connected ultimately. But to talk specifically about the sexualization aspect, I don't want to focus, I wouldn't want to limit the conversation just to schools, because it's everywhere.
It's
everywhere.
ubiquitous. Yeah, it's ubiquitous. And why do you think it's worse for women of color? Not why do you think, in other words, why not, do you have evidence of the fact that it's worse? I'm saying, like, assuming it is worse, which I'm trusting you on. What
there have been studies. So the National Women's Law Center, if folks watching this want to, type in National Women's Law Center, they came out with a study maybe 2 years ago or so about girls of color in schools and how they get dress coded far, far more than white girls.
So the question I would say to you is, why do you think that is?
This is this has actually been written about by historians, and there is a body of literature that talks about the fact that really since slavery in this country, the idea of the Black body, the Black female body, as being more inherently sexual than the white female body has been a very popular idea, consciously and unconsciously. And many people, many white people, some people of color too, for sure, when they see a Black girl's body, they sexualize that body in a way that they may not sexualize a parallel white girl's body. So for example, Black girls are sexualized at much younger ages. They get called out for their clothing, for purportedly behaving in a sexual way more than white girls are. And again, the National Women's Law Center has a really, really interesting study on this.
I mean, it's a really interesting phenomenon. So your work to a certain degree has sort of morphed in the most recent years. You're working on dress coding in particular. And what sort of got you interested in that?
So I've always been interested, as I said a minute ago, about the idea of agency, how, because this word slut is so slippery and really at the end of the day, kind of meaningless. So, what do you have to do to be called a slut, right? And one of the big things that a person does is she dresses in a certain way. And so a girl or woman's clothing choices become evidence, oh, I know you're a slut because of the way you're dressing. You are choosing to wear these clothes. That is evidence that you are a slut. Now, there are a lot of other things a girl or woman can do that can be used as evidence that she truly is a slut. But clothing to me is really interesting because we are called out all the time for what we're wearing. And it really doesn't even matter what we're wearing. So, we were just talking about schools, but also there are so many examples very recently even that have happened in airports and on airplanes where women are told, you cannot board this aircraft dressed like that.
Really?
I've been wearing spaghetti straps. low cut with cleavage, short skirt. This also tends to be women of color, but white women also.
Wait, Laura, I'm trying to even envision that happening. You're telling me that people, guards or security, somebody stopped women for, well, I mean, I see women.
Flight attendants this happens all the time at Sheva. A flight attendant will come over to a woman, even if she has a young child sitting next to her, and will say, "Excuse me, ma'am, you're going to have to cover up. Do you have anything in your bag? Do you have a sweater? Do you have a jacket? Your dress is bothering other people." A number of airlines actually.
We're not talking about flights to Israel on El Al.
No. This is not a religious issue. United Airlines, American Airlines, I forget the name of the Australian airline,
Really?
Jetstar, no, this is not a religious issue.
I'm a little flabbergasted. Does it happen like in the Midwest? Does it happen in New York? I know that it sounds crazy that I'm asking.
Yeah, it happens in Miami. It happens in Houston. It happens everywhere. Slut shaming is everywhere, Batsheva.
No, I know that, but I usually think of slut shaming as something that happens kind of underneath the surface. Do you know what I mean? I don't think of it as the fodder for like day-to-day conversations amongst, polite, well-behaved people. I mean, that's not totally fair, because I think that I do think about it as uber polite, sort of uber, upper echelon, snobby people. Maybe there's some conversations like that. But a flight attendant, I don't know. You are. Yeah, I am really stunned. I mean,
class really doesn't have anything to do with it. I mean, again, like what you're saying actually is interesting, because the whole idea of agency, right? Like, I think what you're kind of like getting at is, well, if there's no reason to call somebody a slut, why would there be slut shaming? But there's always a fabricated reason. There's always a trumped up reason. Like,
right.
I mean, you can get called a slut for nothing.
Right.
Really, nothing. Right. Just like you can get sexually harassed, you can be assaulted, you can be raped, having done nothing, quote unquote.
Right. So I have not thought about this at all. So I could be completely like going up the wrong tree or whatever. But I think to myself, when slut shaming happens in a community, be it a high school community, being in a religious community, being in a mother's community, be any kind of women's community, when slut shaming happens, it often has a back end of like insidious relationship issues that people are managing that way somehow, right? Like, people are jealous of other people, or people are uncomfortable with other people, or people trying to set up their own hierarchy. And so they do that by sort of putting down other people subtly or not. Like there's some sort of organic relationship issues going on underneath the slut shaming that causes the slut shaming. But when you talk to me about an airplane that's where I'm getting stuck, where I'm talking, what, I mean, that's why I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around that. But that could just be my, my stupidity. Let's use that word.
No, of course not. It is hard to wrap your head around. It is. But this is our world. Here, I'll give you another example. This was actually in the New York Times. This does have a religious cast to it, but I mean, it really could happen anywhere. There were several young women who were in a church on Sunday in Indiana, and they were wearing leggings. And there was a woman in the pew behind these young women who was there with her family, her husband and her sons. I think her sons were high school or college age. So this mom went bananas. How could these young women wear leggings to church? Not because she thought it was
inappropriate somehow.
Right, inappropriate from a
formality perspective,
liturgical,
right?
Theological point of view, inappropriate in that they were sexualizing themselves. She wrote a letter to the editor of her local paper. It went viral. That's how it ended up in the New York Times, where she blamed these young women for sexualizing themselves and thereby potentially distracting her sons. I can't even imagine the mortification of her sons, and how they should not do that. Anyway, It
I'm sure
costs a
they've
whole
changed their name and moved east since then.
who knows, maybe they agree with mom. I don't know. Um, and this letter writer also said that because of the way they dressed, they were inviting harassment and assault. Okay. So this was last year in Indiana. Again, I know it's a church, so that's not an
No,
airport, but it happens
point.
all over the place.
Right. No, no. Yeah, it's not that I think that it doesn't happen all over the place, but I always often think of it as a subtext of other issues that are going on. So anyway, but I got you totally sidetracked. Let's talk about the dress coding going on in schools and why you're interested in that particular, because I think you're going to do your next book on that, right?
I'm not sure what my next book will be on, but I'm having fun with, I mean, fun as disturbing as this is. But I do, on Instagram, I have a project I call Being Dress Coded, where I post photos of people send me photos, or if there's often news coverage of these events, like, these airplane events, I'll post a photo. I always get permission. And then just some quick commentary, just to raise awareness that this is ubiquitous, that this is omnipresent. It's not only in schools, but there are so many incidences in schools that it does tend to, predominantly, I do tend to predominantly show events in schools, but these are girls who so a lot of schools will have a rule that girls can only wear leggings if they also wear a long tunic that covers their behind. So if a girl shows up in school with leggings and her shirt isn't long enough, she can get dress coded. And when I say dress coded, that can mean being sent home. It can mean being sent to the principal's office. There are documented examples of police officers being brought in to escort a girl out of the school building because of what she's wearing. And the rationale is that you need a dress code, because if you don't have a dress code and girls wear these inappropriate outfits, it will be a distraction to other students' learning. And of course, what's unsaid is, how can a girl learn if she's being escorted out of the building, or being put in the principal's office and is literally excluded from the classroom? So clearly, there's a weird disjunction there. But wearing spaghetti straps can get you dress coded. You know how a lot of shirts intentionally are cut so that they fall a little bit off the shoulder, and you can see a bra strap. Showing a bra strap can get you dress coded. There's this thing called the fingertip rule. Do you know what the fingertip rule is?
Yeah, is that between the shirt and the pants?
It means that when you're standing up and your arms are straight down on your sides, the fingertip rule is that your fingers have to be shorter than the hem of your skirt or shorts. And if your skirt or shorts are too short, you get dress coded for that, for violating the fingertip rule.
What I always thought was amusing about that is that I have the world's shortest arms. Like, I have pygmy arms. Like, that's such a bizarre rule, because my arms are way shorter probably than your arms, Leora, even though we're the same height.
So have you ever been dress coded with the fingertip rule?
No, but I was, when I was in 4th grade, my Chumash teacher, my Bible teacher, took a ruler and measured how many inches above my knee my skirt was. I still remember it was 4 inches above my knee. It was the time of mini skirts, and I was so humiliated. I remember that. I was sort of half humiliated and half like enraged, which was good. But I'm so curious. I'm just going to push back a little bit. How do you feel?
Before you push back, can I just say something and then push back all you want?
For
sure. So what you just described, the ruler, that is not just in religious schools. That happens in public schools. That just needs to be said. But go ahead, push back.
Really? No, because I do. What do you feel like it's completely unreasonable for a school to want some kind of standards of dress?
No, I'm not anti-dress codes. I think dress codes should be written in a way that is gender neutral. And often they are not written in a way that is gender neutral. That's one thing. Another thing I will say is, outside of the religious communal environment, the reality is clothing that, parents are buying for their daughters that are even reasonably fashionable. The skirts tend to be on the shorter side. And, often it's a sleeveless top, and that in many contexts, perhaps the majority of contexts in our country, that's considered acceptable. I mean, would anybody fault me for wearing a sleeveless top? Like, I don't think anybody's batting an eyelash,
No,
right?
you look lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. This would not pass muster in many schools. So the other thing I want to say is this is a problem with dress codes that are not written in a gender neutral or fair manner, is that when you have a dress code, then if you're an administrator or a teacher, you need to enforce the dress code, right? Because why have the rule on the books if you're not going to enforce it? So what ends up happening is teachers and administrators spend a lot of time looking at girls' bodies.
Right. See, that's, oh my God, that is what makes me the craziest. Right. Like all this. Yes.
So, and often young girls who are sexuality, they're wearing like a cute sundress with spaghetti straps. Sexuality is nowhere on their mind at all. They're years, I'm talking about 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 9-year-olds who are pulled out of class because they're wearing a cute little sundress that grandma bought them. Why are people looking at their bodies? You know, that is just so morally wrong. So those are my problems with dress codes. I will say I have 2 children, boys, currently in college, and they both went to Jewish schools. One of them went to an Orthodox school, and one of them went to a non-denominational Jewish school. And the latter, the non-denominational one, has a dress code that I thought was extremely fair and was written in a gender neutral way. And I would, you know me, I would always pepper my kids like for reports. So did anybody ever get dress coded? Did anybody ever get slut shamed? And my son who went to that school said it was a non-issue. Like people felt it was fair. Nobody violated it because there was no temptation because it was fair. And that was the end of that.
It's so interesting because my oldest son went to public school for high school. He went to Bronx High School of Science, and there the dress code really was your top had to meet your bottom. I think your shirt had to meet your pants or something like that. I don't know, maybe there was something else. And he said to me, it was so interesting. He said, and this is like the situation where all the religious schools that I know would be horrified. Like the girls come in like tank tops or shorts. And he said, it was so interesting because girls did come in obviously with tank tops and shorts, but it's so ubiquitous. Nobody gave it a second thought. He said, you could tell the girls who were dressing specifically because they wanted to get attention because they would dress differently, but it wasn't the length of the shorts or the length of the shirt top. It was other elements of what they were wearing, which I think is where the idea of being able to make rules doesn't really work. That's why I feel like making rules about this stuff often doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, once something is forbidden, then everybody wants it. But if you're just so accustomed to seeing shoulders, you don't really think about it. But if the shoulders are always hidden, and then one day it's like, voila, then of course people are going to notice.
Right. It's like I always joke around, the Victorians covered the legs of their pianos. And if you uncovered that, that was considered like, oh my God, so erotic. We're running out of time. So, but which is amazing because I feel like we just started talking, but I really would like to just ask you if you can in a minute or 2 or 3, just like, you feel like this dress coding is part of a larger problem, I'm assuming. And like, what would you recommend to sort of counter that problem or go against that problem?
Oh my God, like what do we do to get rid of slut shaming?
Well, I mean, you must have thought about that. Like, or what are some steps that would be, like, I guess that's what I'm saying. I'm not like, I'm not saying to you what's the solution, but like as parents or as, leaders in the community or as teachers, like, where do you go with this? Because we don't want to just keep going down the same rabbit hole, right?
Yeah. I mean, so the one thing that I believe would be helpful would be if people stopped using words like slut and hoe and all the synonyms. Just so I'm not advocating linguistic censorship. What I am advocating for is a sort of mindfulness about language. Societally, there are very hurtful words that we have kind of all collectively decided we're not going to use those words because they are so incredibly hurtful, even if we're using them in a playful, we think, humorous way. And even if we're using certain terms with consent, I want to add slut to that list of words. So even calling like a girlfriend, hey slut, or hey ho, like in a friendly way, I also think we should not use the word ever, even in that context. Because when we use the word, it makes, it opens up this portal where we think about girls and women being in the category of sluts. Like if you don't use the word, then that category in our minds, I don't know that it'll cease to exist. I don't know if the mind works that way, but it will not be front and center, right? It will not be a category we immediately cognitively, jump to because we all categorize people. But why would sexuality, it's like going back to what we were saying at the beginning about public figures, public political figures like a Kamala Harris. Why is anybody even thinking about insulting her from a sexual point of view? That is not like even logical. It's because that's how we categorize women, right? So I do think language is important. I think language shapes how we think. And so that's my plea to everybody, to, even as a joke, and especially not as a joke, just don't use those words.
If that doesn't seem such a, that's like what I would say to my kids, that's a little wish, little bear. Like that's a doable wish. Like that doesn't sound so crazy. I mean, I don't know, but yeah, I was thinking it's funny because the male equivalent would be like to call a guy a player. Do you feel like that's equivalent?
No, because that's not a pejorative. Or I mean, it can be a pejorative, but not. I mean, it can also be a compliment.
And what do you feel about people who say they want to reclaim the word?
Oh, wow. Well, that's a whole other conversation. I mean, as you know, there was a whole movement. It kind of has ebbed at this point.
The slut walks.
Yeah, and I attended, I think 2 of them. There was a huge one at Union Square a number of years ago that I attended. I have mixed feelings about reclamation. Maybe reclamation could happen in the future and it could be successful. I don't think in this climate we're in now, to me, I think it's doomed to fail. So from a strategy point of view, I would say no to reclamation, but I wouldn't say that would have to be true forever, but I just don't think this is the right time.
All right, then I'm going to let you go. And this was great. I'll have to have you back when you write your next book. You know what you're, and we didn't even get to talk to Bad Shoes and the women who love them, which I have to talk to you about. Okay, we'll have you back to talk about that because I need to hear about that. Are you working on another book now, or for right now you're just like taking a little break from your massive number of books that you've written?
I appreciate all your compliments. I am taking a break and pausing and assessing.
Gotcha. Okay. So if people want to follow you on social media, you've got Being Dress Coded.
I've got Being Dress Coded on Instagram. I also have Leora Tanenbaum, but that's boring. The interesting stuff that we talked about tonight is on Being Dress Coded. And then on Twitter, I'm just Leora Tanenbaum. But yeah, Being Dress Coded is where I really spend my time.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to blow your kiss and we'll say goodnight. Thank you for doing this with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.